Hey, welcome to Beyond Sunday Conversations from the Green Room. And this week we're doing something really special since my dad is here and we're preparing for this upcoming Father's Day special service. I wanted to include him on our podcast this week. And also it's special because we just came out of the Southern Baptist Convention. And so instead of taking this opportunity to talk about my sermon on Sunday, I wanted to talk about the Southern Baptist Convention just a little bit. Because my dad also was at the Southern Baptist Convention as a Southern Baptist pastor, and myself being there also wanted to take an opportunity to talk about it, some of the things that were our takeaways from the convention, and talk about one issue in particular that was of importance that we voted on. So hopefully you'll find this helpful. I've had several people in the church talk to me about the convention. I know you have as well. Ask about what happened, what's going on. What are your takeaways from it? And so I wanted to hear from you a little bit, Dad, as far as what some of your takeaways were. What was something that you left that kind of was resonating with you from the convention?
Well, I appreciated several things as a small church pastor. I really appreciated the emphasis that they have on protecting small churches and in particular bivocational pastors. We had a big debate about whether to go to Anaheim for one of the following conventions. And one of the reasons that some objected to that was because how does a small church help their pastor make that journey all the way across?
Because it's expensive.
It's expensive. And they weighed that against the benefit of having a massive Christian witness and testimony in that part of our country. And so
saying California needs the gospel?
Absolutely, wow. They do. Just fortuitously, we were sitting next to a couple from California, and there are Christians in California.
It's amazing.
Southern Baptists, by the way. And so that was one thing that got my attention. We have some nationally certified interpreters for the deaf in our church, and so we've become much more sensitized to ministry to those that have disabilities, particularly in our case, the deaf. And that was another emphasis in the convention. There was a resolution with regard to how churches minister to people with disabilities. 1.8 or 1.3 billion people in the world have disabilities. That's if they were all in one country, it would be the third largest country in the world.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And it's just incredible how we need to be sensitive to that need in the world. And so that was another thing. But then, of course, the major issue, the one real necessary function that we did that was approving the Mueller Amendment to define the pastor role as male only in this generation where we don't even know in our country today what a woman is or what a man is. And so it was very necessary for the future of the church, I believe, to make that clearly defined. The other thing, and they brought it into, there was also a resolution with that in addition to the Mueller Amendment. And there was, in addition to all that, it brings it into, I guess you'd say, consensus with the Baptist faith and message. And as a small church pastor that's had problems with clarity in defining what the pastoral role is or office is, I appreciated that they clearly defined it as elder, pastor, overseer, because that was a real issue.
That's three synonyms speaking to the same office.
Yes. And that also needed to be done because some churches in our little church was part of that, where they divide the office of elder from the office of pastor and make the pastor subservient to a board of elders. And that's an unbiblical church model. And so these are two...
Because the pastors in the church are the elders of the church.
Absolutely. That's why that plurality of definition clarify that was a word that was used over and over and over again with both the amendment and the resolution, was to clarify theology, clarify terminology, and both are don't mean to talk so much, but I'm.
That's why
people say, "Why you're always different when you come back from the convention?" And the other thing, of course, is the worship. To be in a room with 12,000 Christians singing to the glory of God. I mean,
yeah, worship is awesome.
It's awesome.
It is awesome.
It was just incredible. It was such a wonderful experience.
So let me unpack some of that, because you just bulldozed through our whole 20-minute session and all at once. So let's unpack it. So the first thing you said was the focus on the small church, protecting the small church in the Southern Baptist Convention. And what's interesting about that is highlighted that it's something crazy, like 80% of churches or 70% of churches are under 100 in weekly attendance, or what we would consider a small church. And so the small church, what we're talking about is the small church is the normative church in the Southern Baptist Convention. The larger church is not normative. So if you're at Aloma and you're worshiping with 600 people in a week, that's an anomaly. That's not normal. That's not average. That's considered a large church in the Southern Baptist Convention. It's not a mega church by any means, but it certainly is a large church, because most churches, 70%, are under 100. And so most people are attending smaller churches, and smaller churches get overlooked a lot of times because of a lot of reasons. So one reason is just because those pastors are not represented because they are bivocational, or the church doesn't have money to send them to the convention. And so what you have is a disproportionate representation in the convention meeting, where there are more larger church pastors at the convention than there are relative to the actual convention.
That's exactly why I appreciated that emphasis.
Yeah. So we need to be reminded of that as we're making decisions and we're voting on things, that we're understanding that we don't get a skewed view of what the convention actually is, which is we are a small church convention, and we always have been. And that's the thing historically about the Southern Baptist Convention. The Southern Baptist Convention has always been a small church convention of churches where Baptists were on the frontiers, going to the places without the gospel and planting these really small churches in these frontier areas. And the pastors of Baptist churches were typically not educated, or did not have the professional pastoral kind of position that a lot of what we would call the higher churches had, like the Presbyterians or the Episcopalians or churches like that were often in the cities and in the more developed areas. So Southern Baptists have always been, because they were missional, going to the places that needed the gospel. And Paul, I think, is interesting, because Paul, he's a bivocational.
Yeah, he was.
He served as a bivocational minister, basically, in the early church. He was famously a tent maker, right?
Right.
And so there's this understanding of why was Paul doing that. Paul basically tells us why he was doing that. He didn't want to be a burden to the churches, and he wanted the freedom to be able to go wherever God was calling him to go for the purpose of gospel ministry. And so I think it's just a helpful thing to remember that we've got to put the mission ahead of the organization, that we are a missional people about the mission that God's given us. And it's a
balance. Reminder. It's a balance, because the big churches are necessary. I mean, you put your ministry on the line for people to worship if they're in the hospital, or, we need both. We did both, but I just really appreciated the sensitivity to the small church.
Well, it's just a reminder that we're about the mission of reaching people.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not about building some sort of organization, which, anytime you have size, a lot of times you get trapped into the organization and just keeping the organization moving. It's about people.
There's a historian. This helped me so much in seminary, because we studied church history, and there's a historian, I think, Sweet. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Leonard. And there was a quote that I'll never forget. He said, God must really love small churches because he made so many of them.
Right.
I always liked that.
Yeah. So that's good. Also, you mentioned the thing about Anaheim and kind of the distance thing. And that's, again, we always, as Baptists, are wanting to push the envelope. Why do we want to go to Anaheim? We want to go to Anaheim, or whether famously, we want to go to Salt Lake City, and there are some other places. Why do we want to go to those places? Well, we want to have the convention in places where we reach people for the gospel. And so at Aloma, I've talked a little bit about this at our church. Famously, the convention has a thing called crossover, where they have a week's focused of missions in the city in which they do the convention before the convention. And so Aloma got the benefit of this evangelistic effort. We had like 50 seminary students on our campus the week before the convention that we organized them and sent them out into our community to share the gospel with people. We had 6 people pray to receive Christ the week before the convention because the convention was in Orlando.
Yeah.
If the convention was not in Orlando, right. If the convention is not in Orlando, those people don't hear the gospel and don't come to know Christ. But it's because the convention is here that happens. So where do we want to go as a convention? We want to go to places where we can put that intense focus on ministry and missions in a place. And because we know that when we go there, people are going to come to know Christ. So we want to go to Salt Lake City. We want to go to Anaheim. We want to go to those places that need to hear the gospel because we know that there will be gospel impact simply because the convention is going there. So we've got the benefit of that this week, and we want those frontier places to receive the benefit. So I understand the difficulty of going. It's hard to go to Anaheim. It is expensive. It's a long way. We did it. It's expensive. It's a long way. It is a hard thing to do. Now the weather's great, but it's hard to get there. Yeah. And so especially on the piggyback of the discussion about the small churches and that we're a convention of small churches, it's hard enough for a small church pastor to get to Orlando, which is going to be, for most pastors, much easier to get to than Anaheim. And so it just gets exponentially harder. And so we're always trying to balance those things. Missions, practicality for pastors and how it works and all that kind of stuff. But it's just a little bit about the inner workings of how the convention works and what we think about, again, trying to stay missional in our focus, which leads me to another thing that one of my big takeaways, and it's every year my favorite thing about the convention. It's the one thing that I look forward to every year, no matter what else is going on politically or anything else, and it is the sending commissioning service that the IMB puts on during the convention. At some point, we always commission usually 60, 70, 80 missionaries. And I think this year it was right around 70 missionaries that we commissioned at the convention. We get to hear from each and every single one of them. A lot of them, over half of them, we can't even see their identities because they're going to places where it's illegal for them to go and it would be dangerous for their identities to be known. And we hear from them and how God's called them to this people, and we get to pray for them. We get to send them out, and it's always just such a great, wonderful thing. But also it's a reminder of why we partner as Southern Baptists, why we do what we do, because we don't do it for really any other reason but missions. Like, that's why we cooperate, is for missions. And so it's just super together. Yeah, it's if it weren't for that, we wouldn't cooperate. That literally is the reason. And so that's always a cool thing for me to experience and all that. And then on the backside, you mentioned the kind of the theological stuff. And for really, it's been, I think, the last 4 years, we've seen this stress point of talking about the office of pastor, what the office of pastor is. It's happening. It's coming to a head in our culture as well. Like you mentioned, there are gender issues in our culture that we are confused about in society. Like famously in Congress, we can't define what men and women are, which is just bizarre. But there are things that are happening with the gender wars in our culture that are causing problems within the church. And there's these two different lanes of theological discussion, which is, one, we need to be able to define what a pastor is. What is a pastor? And then we need to be able to define who is biblically qualified to serve in the office of pastor. Now, the convention has no authority, so the Southern Baptist Convention can't tell a local church what to do. But the Southern Baptist Convention can determine who is in friendly cooperation with the Southern Baptist Convention. And that's what the discussion is over, is we need to define what is a pastor biblically, so that we can understand and define who is qualified to serve in that office as pastor. And if you don't have, at least if you don't have that understanding that is a core Baptist faith and message understanding of what a pastor is and who can serve in that office, then it draws a line between who can be in friendly cooperation with another. So let me ask you, why is it so important? Because the hot button issue ultimately comes down to this: women serving in the role of pastor. Are we bigots? Because we voted overwhelmingly, 75%, that a pastor is an overseer. It's all the same office, it's all the same person, and you must be a man, biblically qualified man, to fulfill that office. Are we bigots? Are we being old-fashioned?
People of the word, and Paul says very clearly and distinctly, I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. And that is not, the only way you can get around that or ignore that is to say the Bible is not inerrant. And I've read theological articles that are trying to support that position, and they say Paul was a misogynist, and that's not. And once you go down, we went through this in the 70s and 80s, and we're not going back there again. If you back off of the commitment to the inerrancy of Scripture, is Katie bar the door, the barn door's open, and it's just
because then you can't define anything as truth at that point. Once you can throw one thing out, you can throw everything out.
There's an article I wish I didn't think about sharing it, but you can find it probably by his last name, McQuilkin, and he wrote an article on the implications of cultural emphases on our theology, and he made this statement, and I think this is the bottom line for me anyway. It says, God intended for the Bible to form our culture rather than have the Bible formed by our culture. And that's what's happening with this. And I think that's the bottom line. One thing that was not mentioned at the convention that is important for me personally is the issue of headship. How can a church model the principle of headship in a marriage when the woman is over the other male leadership of the church? And in that passage that talks about headship, clearly makes a parallel between marriage and the church. The husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church.
So theologically, why is headship so important? Because people look at that and go, it's a minor issue. It doesn't matter. Why is headship so important? Why is this a non-negotiable?
There's a little clip from Sesame Street that I always think of when I think about this issue, and it's the two-headed monster. And, I really believe God has blessed me with a wife that fully is committed to that. The other side of this coin is we have to love our wives even as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So if you have to sacrifice an afternoon of golf in order to have a wife that will listen to you and respect, we have differences in marriage, just like we have differences at the convention.
I don't want to sacrifice my afternoon of golf.
Well, you got to do what you got to do. But
you need to cut this. This has gone off the rails. This was an unauthorized discussion.
It was funny because I wore different clothes on church on Sunday because Dr. Presley wore his three-piece suit at the convention, and so my wife, who is under my headship, insisted that I wear a tie.
She picked out your clothes.
Yes, she absolutely did. And so we had kind of a joke about that. But I wore what she wanted me to wear because
you're smart.
I'm smart, and it doesn't violate any theological convictions. And so, we have these tensions.
Wearing a tie violates my theological convictions.
Well, I'm not happy about it. She didn't like my shoes either, but
well, you do need better shoes.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
But it was. I think that is the watershed issue. God intended for the Bible to mold our culture rather than be molded by our culture, and that's the watershed. That's where we are in this issue.
But the thing that I want to get at is, why does God make headship so important in relationship to both marriage and church issues? Is because it goes back to the garden, does it not?
Well, I think so. In fact, it's the New Testament says it's according to the law. Well, it's not one of the 10 Commandments.
That's right.
But when
So which law?
After the one where he said, how does it go? Your desire will be for your husband, but he will rule over you. And that's where headship was started. And the reason, and
why? Because of the curse, like he's laying it out in the curse. The headship principle comes out of the curse because it was established even before the curse.
Right.
Because Adam was put in the garden ultimately to protect and provide for his spouse and make sure that she was protected and provided for. Then we are dead in Adam, even though she ate the fruit, because ultimately Adam failed to protect and provide for his wife. And then what it then comes out of the curse is the solution to the curse, which is what? We have a new head that does what? Our new head is protects and provides for us through ultimately his death on the cross and his resurrection from the dead. And that if we would submit ourselves to his headship, we then come under his provision and protection, and we then are saved. And so God's laying out...
Following him, just as a wife is protected.
Exactly.
She follows her husband.
So the reason why it's important that we submit to Christ, or the reason why wives submit to their husbands and the church submits to their pastor, is not out of authority, but out of provision and protection that points us to the provision and protection that we have in Christ.
I think it is even deeper than that, because when he created the woman, he said, I'm going to make you a helper, suitable helper. And I think there's some psychological, physiological differences between men and women that make it, she's suitable for that role as a support and a help. I think there, there's huge, obviously, individual differences, but...
Which is why you better listen to her about what you wear.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Among other things.
Well, there's things he's created men for, and there's things he's created women for, right?
Exactly.
Men, he's not created men to be mothers, and he's not created women to be fathers, right? And that sounds simple and obvious, except that's literally what we're fighting about in our culture right now.
Well, just look at the cars as you're driving. If there's a couple in the car, who's driving?
Well,
it's usually who opens the door. I mean, there are, I think, some basic biological principles that are formulated by God to make it as easy as possible for us to follow his guidelines in the area of headship. I find all of that in the, I will make you a helper suitable.
Yeah.
But he was off fishing and she was left vulnerable. And by the way, she ate the fruit, but God holds Adam
I know,
accountable.
that's my point, because he's the head. And ultimately, his failure came first. If he'd have done his job,
that's right,
she would have been protected, but he wasn't protecting and providing. He failed as a head, and so now we're all dead in him. Yep. We're not dead in Eve. We're dead in Adam, because he was the failure. At the end of the day, it's not about who's more valuable, because both are valuable, right? And God, and this may be the most people, because here's the thing. It's like, well, you're saying women are less than because they can't be pastors. No, I'm not saying men are less than because they can't be mothers.
Yeah.
Like it's just
the way God. Yes.
But the most profoundly theological thing that happens in the early part of Genesis is God says that something is not good before the fall.
Yeah.
Like he creates perfection. There is no sin. He calls everything good, and then he comes to something and he says it's not good. And the thing that he says is not good, when it's in a perfect world, is he says it's not good that the man is alone. And he creates woman, and it was always the design. God didn't fail. It was always the design, but he's just pointing it out.
I think
man needs woman, woman needs man.
I think that's an important point you just drew, because the biggest hindrance to the principle of headship is not the woman, it's the man, taking her for granted and not doing exactly what Adam did, not doing his job. And so the reason why he brought every animal to make the point, there's nothing else in creation that can fill this void that you feel.
That's right.
This loneliness, this, a dog can't do it. He can bring you your slippers,
My dog does not bring me my slippers.
You haven't trained him. But the point is, it is not good for man to be alone. And the whole reason for all of that was so that he would appreciate her and understand her value and worth. So no, it is not that man is greater or worth more. It's just the way God set it up.
Well,
and that's why we need this in the church, this clarification.
Beck does not bring me my slippers either.
Oh, yeah.
But the value of her is not in whether she brings me my slippers or not. It's that she actually theologically completes me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like I'm less of a man without
You can't
her,
be a man.
because I can't be without her. She completes me. And so there is something beautiful about God's design, that it's not about lesser or greater. It's just about completeness. And the completeness of God's creation is seen in the gender roles as it's pictured in the church, as it's pictured in the family.
And we're in danger of losing.
We are.
In our culture and in our churches. We have to.
And it's no surprise that the families are under attack and falling apart. It's because they go hand in hand. And ultimately,
what's wrong with our culture?
And ultimately, we lose the gospel in it all, because we lose the fact that we need our head, who is Jesus.
It begins in the home. That's where our society is going off the rails.
It's why God created the family before he creates the church.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Thanks. That was fun. Little preview of what's coming up Sunday, I guess. So, thanks, Dad. See y'all Sunday.